want to think about, well, how have we been tap dancing? I think this tap dancing is a metaphor, of course. I think on the one hand, this tap dancing has been constituted by histories of violence. So for 526 years globally, we have been committing acts of violence amongst ourselves as human beings. We've been murdering and doing all sorts of things that has brought us to partly, when we talk about the accumulation of wealth, we all know that it's done through violence. So that's part of the tap dancing we've been doing. In this country, we've been tap dancing since 1652 through these violent acts. And we thought that 1994 was the ending of the tap dancing. And then we realized it was the continuation of the tap dancing in a different way, right? So what does this mean? It means that I think today we are dealing and have to confront ourselves with these catastrophic wounds, as it were. Because it's one thing to inflict a wound once, but when you do it over so many centuries, it becomes catastrophic. And I think part of the problem that we are faced with really is, how do we deal with these catastrophic wounds? When the wound is so big that you kind of think, where do I even begin to address the problem? And I think that's the confrontation, or that's the challenge that our democracies face. How do our democracies respond to these catastrophic wounds? How do we address this? And in this country, I think we have not fared very much better than most of the world, actually, particularly not the West. We know that much. And part of the problem is that we mistook the sign for the destination. When 1994 happened, and I'm not sure who still remembers the two pigeons, the symbol of peace, all those beautiful signs, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu giving us the metaphor of the rainbow nation of God, and so on and so forth. We took these images to mean that we are that already, and forgot to do the work that would make us into a nation unified in its diversity. We are not that. Far from it. And this is part of the problem. So when Prof. Matizela speaks about where are the young people, this is the stuff we are inheriting. It's not going to go anywhere. This is part of where the issues are. One last comment I want to make then is, how might we respond to this? I guess this is all what we all want to kind of grapple with. How do we respond to this? A lot of suggestions have been made, and I'd also like to throw one other thing in there, and that is, I think we have a blueprint of sorts, and that for me is the Freedom Charter. And I often regard the Freedom Charter as a first draft of a philosophy of freedom. And when you look at the Freedom Charter, really what it talks about are basic human needs. The so-called freedom demands in the Freedom Charter were talking about basic human needs that people wanted. And that is exactly what people are still asking for today. Some of those, for those of you who may not be aware, were questions of land, well, hello, education, right? Sanitation. A few years ago, people, even ongoing, people do not have decent sanitation. Labor/wages, water, and so on and so forth. So we are still, so what, for me, the Freedom Charter represents then is, if we're going to grapple with something that looks or begins to develop itself into freedom as a set of practices of how we live with each other, it has to start with human provisioning. We cannot imagine freedom while we have all this destitution around us. So how do we do that? I think that's the problem we all have. And I don't have the solution. But the last thing then is that I don't think we're going to get anywhere beyond all this mess, to the extent that, or rather insofar as we continue to allow the values that the Chief Justice was talking about, that we need to return to, the sense of commitment, insofar as we continue to allow ourselves, or those values in a way, to be captured and derailed by capitalism, by consumerism, where my sense of worth as a human being is measured by my bank account, right? So we have, in a sense, part of the problem is how do we get ourselves out of this empire of capital and capital accumulation? And until we figure out something around that, we're probably going to be having the same conversation in 2030, as you were saying, unfortunately. But I really hope not, and I really do have a lot of hope that we'll be able to figure something out. Otherwise, yeah, thank you very much.
I'm very happy to have with us today Ayanda Nusani from the warehouse, but she's also a student at UCT. And she is at least a younger voice. Ayanda and I have done a lot of things together, including Prof. Pumla. We've facilitated the film Black Christmas together, and that was quite a good experience. Ayanda, it's lovely to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to initially just ignore Renee and her flashing cards, but I also do work with her, and so I don't want to do that. So I just have a couple of thoughts on what the Chief Justice was saying this morning, but also some thoughts of my own that I've been kind of pondering on the last couple of years. And the first one is, I think we do ourselves a great injustice when we assume best intention of each other. I think that we assume that we want the best of the other. I think the Freedom Charter gives us a prophetic image of what can be and what should be, what we hope for, but I don't think we've internalized those ideals as our own and ones that we want for the other. And so I think while we can search in ourselves and look for the better self, it is okay to assume the worst of ourselves and to work from there. I think it's also very difficult for us to create a shared future when we have a very unequal and unjust history. It's quite tough of us as a country to expect a government that itself is victim to this injustice to be forefront in pioneering anything that is shared between all of us. I think placing the role of change and reconciliation and forgiveness and mercy and grace on victims in this country is a grave injustice on its own. And again, we do ourselves a great injustice by assuming best intentions of ourselves. I think that the TRC recommendations give us a moral compass for why we desire to create a shared future. It allows us to think about how and why it's important to centralize victims of apartheid and colonialism and slavery in this country, and it's something that we all have not internalized. I think that our job primarily as a country is to assume a moral compass that isn't self-righteous, but a moral compass that says, I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge that you actually deserve the right to live freely and the right to have a meal every night. I think that we need to understand that as a society as a whole, we don't assume that we all need and require justice. And so I have 4 statements that I want to say towards that in terms of creating strategies for changing national perception. I think it is okay for us to have an intolerance to bullshit. I think it is okay for us to be intolerant of racism. I think it is okay for us to be intolerant of a country and people who refuse to change. I was in Cradock about a month ago on a research trip, and at dinner time with the family that we're staying with, it comes out that how bad this government is and how things were just much simpler back in the good old days. And I was just so burdened by the conversation, not because I assumed best of this worm that we're staying with, but also that we've done just so much work. Like South Africans, Black South Africans were pioneering the TRC, calling everyone to the table, asking everyone to be sympathetic and to be compassionate. And here you find in the small town of Cradock, a man who still believes that things were better in the good old days. And I think it's okay to be intolerant of him. and to cost him out. The sad thing is that he's only 65, so he's got a good 20 years in him to be around us and to be in these conversations. And that really scares me. I think we also have to be able to communicate more broadly what the desires are. We were joking with one of my mentors about how many old white people are in the room. Hi, everyone. But there's a lot of y'all. There's a lot of old people in this room. And it's I don't know what's happening. Also, it's like 9 o'clock, so people have lectures, and so they can't come through. I'm a master's student, so I couldn't make the time to get here. But I think we need to be able to communicate broadly and collectively internalize the ideals that we want to see in this country, right? And so the ideals of having sanitation, flushing toilets, the dignity of being able to not have to worry about how you're gonna get to where, the safety of not being scared of your loved ones and the men around you, that they might kill you at whim. I think also we aren't collectively burdened and propelled to do more. And the more isn't this deep philosophical thing of like, oh, let's reimagine society as it is. The more is opening your bank accounts and funding a student to go to school. The more to the church, and I'm a Christian, is to realize that your buildings are empty for 6 days in a week. They are only used for 4 or 5 hours on Sundays. And they're unoccupied for 6 days. So I work for an organization called Outliers, and we help people run after-school programs. And one of the biggest issues that we have is that there aren't spaces for men and women to run these after-school programs, so open your damn doors. You know what I mean? Like, open your damn doors and let people come into your space and be made up to feel uncomfortable and create that kind of change. You got 2 garages, both of them are empty for at least 8 hours while you're at work, open your damn doors. One other thing that I want to speak to is a lack of willpower to do more. So I was sharing on our drive here at 7 o'clock in the morning about how there's things that I just don't care about because they don't affect me. And so I was shamefully saying to Caroline that I don't really think about how much patient attendance pay get earned monthly or weekly. It doesn't affect me. I Uber everywhere, so I don't really think about it. And that shouldn't be the cause, right? I think that because we don't experience these big kind of oppressive spaces, you don't walk into a room and you feel othered. You don't walk into the room and be the only young person in the room, the only black person in the room. And so because you don't experience those kind of injustices, you don't really care. And so the work to even have to convince people to untangle themselves from being racist, to convince people that colonialism wasn't a blessing to us. The act of having to convince people to come to the room is violence on its own. And so what I often speak to Dion about is the act of daily untanglement that he does as a white man and what other white men need to be doing, and women. It's to one, admit your proclivity to continuously being racist and continuously perpetuating racism, to admit that and to do the daily work of untangling, and to open your damn doors and give back everything that you stole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayanda, for being with us today. Friends, one of the most exciting journeys that I have been embarking on the past 2 years was a journey between the Kulumani Support Group and the Dutch Reformed Church. And we've got Dr. March Jobson of the Kulumani Support Group here and a lot of their members. And Kulumani is an organization that we're going to talk a lot about in the next phases of our work, of our conference. But an organization that represents survivors of gross human rights abuse who haven't really been receiving any redress after colonialism and apartheid. And it was a huge pleasure for me to link the 2 organizations, the Dutch Reformed Church and Kulumani, with each other, and to witness the new hope that is evolving from this journey. And I ask you to give a warm hand of applause to Dr. Gustav Claassen, the General Secretary of the Dutch Reformed Church. Gustav, we are really happy to have you. And he's an Old Testament scholar, so that gives him an extra bonus points.
It's only Dion who will call me an Old Testament scholar because he's a good friend. We were together at seminary, and for a long time we went our own paths, and for the past 2 years, as he mentioned, we could meet up again and share a lot of good memories. But I think what Dion is involved with, and with his background of the Dutch Reformed Church, the theology and the history of the Dutch Reformed Church, he's more than instrumental to help us in many, many ways. Also on the issue that we address today, the issue of restitution. I just want to thank you for being part of this conference. Thank you for the invitation of the hosts, and even to be part of the panelists panel here, this discussion. Thank you. It is a most humble experience for us as the Dutch Reformed Church to be part of a conference which is addressing the theme of restitution, creating a shared future. For the Dutch Reformed Church to be part of this, to play a role, to rethink and to reimagine, is really a humble experience. Thank you so much to the hosts and to Dion in person. This is very important for the Dutch Reformed Church. Because when Wilhelm was making his remarks, I thought in many ways there's a lot of comparisons between his journey and the journey of the Dutch Reformed Church. We are still struggling with our legacy. We are still struggling to come to terms with the role that we played in the apartheid era, because the Dutch Reformed Church is known for the role it played to give a theological base to the ideology of apartheid. It was very prominent for a long way. We would also like to think that we also played a small part in the dismantlement of apartheid, but we played a very, very important role for a very, very long time. So events like this and discussions like this, and to also in our own very small way to take part in projects and processes of restitution and healing, it means a lot, because it's not important, not only important for us to play a role in the healing and the restitution of our beloved country, but in the processes we are being healed and freed ourselves. So this is very, very important for us. I think the challenge of the Chief Justice is very, very important, to be pragmatic. You know, I've been a pastor in congregations for nearly 30 years, and you know, to have a sermon every Sunday, nothing comes about it. You know, you preach repentance, but nothing happens. That is a nightmare. And he challenged us today, and especially addressed the church in this way, to take part in think tanks, challenge us to be more pragmatic in our efforts to bring change and healing about. So that is one of the important messages that I will take with me today, and also shared it, and there's a lot of them also here, shared it with our ecumenical partners. There's already a lot being done, but it's not enough. So that is one of the things to take part in think tanks and in projects, especially on the education, the land reform, and economics. That is a very, very important challenge. Yeah, maybe I can tell just a little bit, but because of being part of the Calvinist tradition, that's the tradition the Dutch Reformed Church is part of. It's not easily also to talk about yourself or what you are busy at this stage. So please see it in perspective. I'm just giving a bit of information to you, and this is not about boasting. It's far not enough. We have just started, I think, to be involved and with projects and discussions and events that we are hosting. But just to tell a few things, I think Dion referred to the Kulumani Trust's support. This journey with the Kulumani support group is very, very important for us. We learn a lot. We gather some wisdom on this journey to justice and peace. It's very, very important. We have identified 9 places nationally which we are going to have projects together with communities on healing and restitution. And then on the regional level, I think here in the Cape area, Dr. Bram Hamnekom are also here, and he can elaborate, maybe during tea time or whatever, if there's some opportunity, he can tell us about what is being done in partnering with other churches. For instance, in the Rust area a few years ago, Hermanus a few weeks ago. And then also somebody, sorry, thank you, just a last remark. Somebody also referred to the meeting at Bella Bella with the land reform. We are very, very encouraged at this stage of a lot of our members who are farmers, small farmers and mega farmers, who is embracing the land reform. These are all signs of hope for us, and it encourages us on this journey. But my time is up. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Dion.
Thank you very much, Gustav. Our panel conversation assists us in our deliberations in the next 2 days. We're going to take a lot from what we've learned here, and then it's going to inform the work that we're going to do up until Sunday. Before we're going to look at some of the other questions that have not been answered yet, I would like to invite you again to turn to the people closest to you and to just have a conversation, continue the conversation about what you have heard here and what are the thoughts that come up in your minds. The first question, and I'm going to put it to you, Stan. Yeah. And if you can just come to the front and answer here at the mic. The first question, and I'm going to put it to Stan. We have been dehumanized as San community, feeling that our human dignity has been compromised. How can we practically create spaces where we can start the process of healing? And the San community also challenged me this morning, and said, we've got this panel and we haven't really been as inclusive as they would have liked us to include also the San community, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to say we take note of that. But I think this is a very important question, and Stan, I've got the feeling that you are very capable to give us some wisdom here.
Thank you. Why on earth do you think I would have something to say, Dion? Thank you. I think that's a really, really critical question. And I'm glad the question starts with the notion of the dehumanization of people. And so when we talk about restitution, you know, and particularly about land, it's important that we have a conversation that is inclusive of everybody. In this country, we prioritize certain pains above other pains. And it is a fact that the San and the Khoi community have been marginalized to the point where they're not even mentioned. And so, you know, this tokenism of having a Khoi San, you know, drawing on our coat of arms, you know, it sounds as if it's inclusive. But and the Chief Justice made the point as well. Integrity is not just about what you say, but it is when what you do corresponds with what you say. And so as long as this country does not include everybody, the Constitution that we have, as wonderful as it is, will not be worth the paper that it's written on. And so I would imagine that the first step in dealing with this is, number one, an acknowledgement that the Khoi and the San have been completely marginalized, not just by the previous government. Let's get that straight. They are marginalized by the present government. It's almost as if they do not exist. And so one wonders why people become what is called fringe or extremists. And in this case, the resurgence of the Khoi and the San in terms of identity has largely to do with, obviously, identity, but also about the level of marginalization. And I think that we do all these wonderful things at our peril if we exclude that group of people. We know what they can do. You just have to look at what's happening on the Cape Flats. And, you know, it's important that we do not forget to include every single group in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Stan. There is a very important book that I think I would like to just refer you again to. It's the book that Dr. Ruben Richards wrote on the title Bastard or Human. That is talking a lot around the issues that have just been addressed also by Stan. And we've got Pastor Adonis over there that you can just stand, Pastor Adonis. If anybody would like to know more about the book, you are welcome to connect with him. A second question, and I think, Father Michael, I would like perhaps you to answer this. As a white person, one feels that the conversation about restitution is limited to focus only on apartheid and not colonialism also. What do you think about that statement?
It's true. I think it's particularly relevant for us who live here, you know, in the Western Cape, where so much of what is old and beautiful in the Western Cape was built by slaves. And I think because of the recent character of apartheid, we fail to see the slave story. I went a little while ago on a tour around Cape Town, and what was very interesting was and learning about the slave history of the Cape, which is often in memorials that are very small, you have to look down on the ground, where the white men on horses you look up to. So the very physical character of how things are remembered is indicative of that reality. But I think also we need to see, and the Chief Justice made reference to this, what was fundamentally slavery about? What was fundamentally apartheid about? What is the level of inequality in South Africa and the world fundamentally about? It's about greed, greed, greed. And unless we are able to face that, and it's not the greed in them, it's the greed in us. So it's like the shadow side has been played to, and I often feel that we in South Africa are a microcosm of the human family. So if we can begin to face those demons and recover more humane values of our full humanity, which I think again the Chief Justice appealed to, then we could become a different kind of exceptionalism, but a real light to the nations. But only if we are able to face those demons in all of us.
Thank you very much, Father Michael. Prof. Pumla, a question that comes from the Kulemani Support Group. Can victims of apartheid given a second chance to testify, especially those who left behind? I think the question is about a lot of people that feel they've been left behind, and how can they be acknowledged? I hope the mic is going to get... No.
So can victims be given a second chance to testify? I think this is necessary. This is very essential in all our institutions. In fact, it's amazing how so many of the problems that emerged at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission are re-emerging. That the story, that was not the end, that the Truth Commission was an opening of a chapter rather than closure. People talk about closure all the time. It was an opening, and I think, you know, the challenge is on us, on these kinds of communities, to create the spaces. The writing has been on the wall for a long time that these issues have not gone away. We have the generation of the victims who came to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission testify. Now we have their children who are now in their 20s, and they demanding also to be heard because we've had new problems. You know, in my field, we talk about transgenerational transmission of trauma or transgenerational transmission of memory. And it works on both sides. When I said there are no young people here, I wasn't only speaking about a certain group of young people, I was talking across the board. These issues of the past are returning to haunt us. In our field, we speak about these experiences of the past returning as a kind of a haunting type of memory, almost like something that hovers over our lives. However, at the same time, we have to keep in mind that it's not just the memories of the trauma or the re-emergence of the experiences of the past, it's how they play into the present traumas. Young people in the present are facing new traumas that are affecting their lives, and those stories also have to be told. So I absolutely agree. It's essential that these conversations are opened up, that we open the space up in our country to reflect and confront these issues that continue to affect our society, and they play out in violent ways, whether it is physical violence or violence of words. This means for us that these are the signs that the conversations is not closed. In fact, it is opening and reopening over and over again.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pumla. Gustav, the next question is to you. And it's actually a number of people that asked it. It's about the Dutch Reformed Church and the redistribution of land. And the question is, could you tell us more about how the Dutch Reformed Church take responsibility for land restitution, and how do you work with your members in the church around that?
Thank you for the question. Maybe I can start to say that already in 2002 we took some very progressive resolutions at our General Synod on the whole issue of land reform. The Dutch Reformed Church is not against land reform. It views it as a very, very important instrument in the whole process of restitution and reconciliation. That was already in 2002 a very, very important statement as part of that resolution. I think our concern on the issue is not the distribution of land, but the way that it must be done. So I think that is maybe in the recent. We also took part in the invitation of the Constitutional Committee to react or comment on the possible amending of the Constitution. And I think basically our comments were that we are not against it, but we are against expropriation without compensation. Thank you for that word. And that we are in favor that it must be taken. The whole process must be within be in the framework of Article 25 of the Constitution. So that was basically our statement. Since 2002, we motivate our different regional synods to make an audit of the land that belongs to the church. And that leads in a lot of cases where land was given back to denominations that was in need of land, or in some cases during the apartheid term, black churches couldn't own land. So the Dutch Reformed Church in that place to make it possible for those churches to still have buildings and land, they took the title deeds in the name of the Dutch Reformed Church. So all those title deeds were transported to the rightful owners. And yeah, that is basically what we did, and those processes are still. I know of a lot of property that was given back. I'm coming from the Northern Synod. That is basically my home ground, and there was property given back there, and I think also here in the Cape, property was given back. We are very encouraged by a lot of farmers that are members of the Dutch Reformed Church. Also in our research to compile this document, we aligned ourselves very much with the NDP, where partnerships